So if we're all ready, I'm going to begin with a conversation I think that I started off having with Victoria. I think her and I met first on our catch-ups, and we were talking about business and language. And I just thought that was really lovely play on the fact that I'm talking to women in business in Africa, but we all have a very similar language, right? We know that there's accounting standards. It kind of normalizes some aspect of our roles, but there's so much to learn in different industries, in different complexities, in not-for-profit, in for-profit, in different worlds. But, you know, there's a conversation that Victoria and I had, because you've talked about that around moving into that telecoms kind of media space. It's like, how do you learn that new language that's got nothing to do with finance?
Yeah, you're right, Paula. I found it very interesting, actually, that although we all speak the same business language, when you move as a finance person into a different industry, you have to start to learn, you know, everything about that industry. So I came from construction. I had a short stint in banking and then into media. So completely different languages I had to learn there. Yes, generally as finance professionals, we speak the same when it comes to assets are the same, liabilities are the same, you know, the common words are the same, debits and credits are the same. Mm-hmm. But when it came down to the industry, it was very different. So I remember sitting down with the CTO, because we're technology driven, really, for media. I had to sit down with the CTO to understand everything from, especially when it came to our suppliers, and the major vendor that we had as a media house are satellite providers. So these are people who provide us with, I mean, that's what makes up our cost of sales, our cost of earnings. They are satellite providers. So I moved from having builders and vendors who work with tangible assets to having to deal with satellite providers who have transponders in space. And it was very interesting because I had to learn the language. Despite being a finance person, I had to learn how to communicate to these vendors. I had to learn, you know, how to calculate megahertz, how to calculate our pricing, so that we don't get, you know, sold what we shouldn't be sold. So very interesting. I remember I had a meeting. Our CTO at a point in time went away on leave, I think wasn't well. And I had to sit in and discuss with satellite providers. I quickly learned, because I remember, you know, technical people tend to draw. I remember the CTO then drew this really large sheet explaining to me, look, this is where our transponder, they call it the bird in the sky, in the space. You know, the bird is up there, we are on E16, our capacity is 3.5 megahertz here, and this and that. And I was stunned at first, but I later on got a hang of it, and I was able to negotiate a lot of contracts. I remember I negotiated us coming out of a 5-year contract that they had gotten into before I joined the organization. It was terribly expensive. I had to do that negotiation. So, you know, different business languages as you transcend or as you move or as you transition from one industry to the other. But it's incredibly interesting, because when you have that perspective, you can then discuss with anybody in that field. Yeah. Just last year, my organization entered into a new contract with the government in the Middle East. So we came out of a contract with some of our vendors in Europe. And it's the same language, because they're all satellite providers, you know. So it's interesting that you speak a different language in the industry that you're in, despite you being a finance person. But yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. Really interesting. And then I noticed being in tech, and I know Joseph will have some input to this, because when you're in tech, the language actually changes year on year. I'd spent an 18-month gap out of tech, and I came back and they're talking about Kubernetes and containers and all these words. I was like, what are you talking about? It was like, even within a short space of time, the language moves. So Joseph, what have you found? I know that you're big in tech, and you've got a very strong professional services background. What are you finding with business language and how to navigate?
And that's very interesting. Thanks, Paula. I'll just pick it up from where Victoria stopped. And that's changing. So if you look at that technology space, a number of my clients are in that space, from Africa giants like MTN and Airtel to our own Telstra, which has got operations across Asia Pacific. and you've mentioned that, and it's very spot on. It's the Internet of Things, right? Mega data, there's a lot of data, things are changing every time. If you go out of the industry for a month, the vocabulary has shifted. So in the last 5 years or 7 years ago, it used to be about the GSM phone, and it used to be about VAS, value additional services, and all of that. But people have moved from VAS. Nobody's doing all the ringtones and all of that marketing. It's now gone to social media and that space. So I think last week, Apple crossed the 2 trillion mark capitalization. And if you can remember, I'm sure not a few years ago, just a few years ago, when Apple actually became the first US quoted company to pass the 1 trillion capitalization. I think it's not up to 3 years, if I remember correctly. But in less than 3 years, we've crossed that. So it just tells you the rates of change and disruption that is happening, and it's not just in tech. So I run a business now where we focus on raising capital for renewables and all of this green technology. And I'm speaking to entrepreneurs and business people across countries. So if you look at different countries also, the challenges are different. And so as a professional service provider, I can't speak the same language to CEOs or boards of directors. I need to understand what are the pain points. And so that's critical, even in areas where static industries like manufacturing, where things don't change as much and regulation is not tight, like financial services. You still need to understand what are the pain points of the target audience. So in some cases, people are so much interested in cost. And so if you're looking at, developing economies, cost is everything. And they don't want to think about, but if you're in a developed market like Australia or in the UK, you can show them value where you bring in additional value. So sometimes you need to understand what's driving that for the audience. And I think that it's critical for us as finance people to understand that it's the same fundamentals. Yes, the accounting standards don't change as much. Auditing standards, concepts around materiality, professional skepticism, they remain the same. But we need to put in that, become more like an art or artist, the way we express our message, the way we convey those messages has to differ, even across demography. So if you're looking at young people, and ACC has done that well, with the messaging. How do we convey the same message, different group of people differently?
Yeah, and I think everyone also needs to have, a lot of people in ACCA do it too. It's like, play global and, think local as well, because, there's so many different demographics and understanding and willingness to understand as well. And as you were all talking there, it just got me thinking to everything that we do we have to be thinking about the audience and the language that we use so that people understand us. So we've just talked about being in a role to understand the business, and we've gone out and researched and found that information. And I think that's the difference between people that succeed and those that don't, because those that don't are too afraid to ask for the questions, to ask for help, to understand the language, right? I mean, Victoria talked about partnering with the CTO. It's about forming relationships. So it goes back to the fundamentals of business, about forming relationships so that you can have the confidence to ask about things you don't know about.
Absolutely. Just to add one more thing, as CFOs as well, we also need to be very aware of what's happening globally when it comes to changes. In Nigeria, for instance, a lot of the media houses are moving. We're just moving and transitioning from SD to HD, and it's significant investment. There's also the change government-wise from terrestrial TV channels to digital. I think generally most countries have this in their timeline where they all have to go digital. Nigeria ought to have gone digital, I think, since 2 years ago now, but we fully haven't transitioned. But Ghana, I think, has transitioned. South Africa, I'm not sure where they are, but it's understanding the fact that globally, this is what is happening. And for your company to remain competitive, children in those days, back then, we all knew record players and cassettes, right? Who knows that now? We've moved on so much that we're no longer now SD. We don't play out things anymore in SD. It's now high definition. So some children will just grow up into knowing high definition. They won't even know SD. And that's how technology is moving really fast. And investment in this technology means CFOs and finance professionals really need to understand what's happening out there for you to have a competitive edge.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.